Part 1. Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. The offense of Daniel. The book of Daniel, which begins very innocently with a chapter involving the diet of 4 young men, is nonetheless one of the most explosive books in all human history, in that it assumes at every point a philosophy of history which is anathema to autonomous man. Not only is this concept of history assumed as an article of faith, but it is asserted as, in very deed, manifested in the minute details of history by a sovereign God, whose eternal decree does, in fact, mark the sparrow's fall, and numbers the very hairs of man's head. Matthew chapter 10, verses 29 and 30. To assert such a faith in retrospect is one thing, to assert it in prospect another. In Daniel, it is asserted in prospect and verified by the courses of men and empire, if Daniel is to be taken at face value. But it is commonly asserted that Daniel is in essence forgery, and to be dated not from the 6th century BC, from the days of the Chaldean Empire and the Medo-Persian power, but from the Maccabean period, 168 to 165 BC. The ostensible basis of such an assertion is textual criticism. The premise is a philosophy of history radically at odds with Daniel. In terms of this premise, Daniel is a thoroughly impossible and offensive book. It cannot possibly be true, for its veracity would require a reversal of every accepted worldview and philosophy of history of modern man. It is, accordingly, a crass and crude work on such an assumption, too blatant in its supernaturalism to be in any sense acceptable. The offense of Daniel, however, is the offense of all Scripture, for here are concentrated basic elements of biblical faith in sharp and compelling terms that admit of no, quote, poetic, end quote, reading, but require, with harsh urgency, a submission intolerable to autonomous man. These points of offense can be briefly summarized as 4, each in itself entailing beliefs of wide circumference. First of all, Daniel is an offense because it manifests, in unavoidable terms, the biblical concept of God. God the Lord, the sovereign, uncreated, ontological Lord Jehovah, he who is, and beside whom there is none else. This God is to be sharply distinguished from the God of the critics, who are not atheists in that they affirm faith in a God, but believe in a God who is essentially value, or else himself only a being among beings, a senior citizen of the universe. The God of value is the epitome of the good, the true, and the beautiful, the essence of all virtues which man prizes. The God of value finds expression in and through man, so that, in terms of the familiar homiletical phrase, God has no hands but mine to use. This, in terms of Daniel, is a blasphemous concept, for God the Lord is self-sufficient and completely independent of his creation, in no wise needing his creatures in order to act or to manifest himself. In terms of this concept of God as value and its corollary, God has no hands but mine to use. Neither creation nor redemption can be explained in biblical terms. Biblical history, the plagues of Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea, the miracles of Daniel, the virgin birth, and the resurrection, all these and more, if retained, are emptied of biblical meaning and subordinated to a new kind of history in which man's consciousness and existence are paramount, and God's activities hidden and shadowed. The limited God of being is again markedly different from the God of Scripture. Because he is merely one aspect of the universe, however superior an aspect, he cannot control that of which he himself is a product. His power is thus limited, hidden and vague, and his, quote, revelation, end quote, no less uncertain. Only a self-sufficient, sovereign, and omnipotent God can give a full and sufficient revelation of himself. In man, potentiality and actuality are never one, and accordingly, man can never fully reveal himself, both because he can neither know himself perfectly nor control absolutely his present and future actualities. But Because the sovereign God of Scripture has no unconscious element in himself, is self-sufficient and omnipotent, and because, knowing himself perfectly, he can know all his present and future activities fully and perfectly, his revelation is inevitably full and sufficient, and inescapably so. He is incomprehensible and inexhaustible, but never hidden or unconscious in any respect. Because God is never hidden to himself, his revelation is inevitably open and free from the prospect of hidden and future surprises. It follows inevitably, therefore, that if the God of Daniel be the true God, that his revelation be both infallible and perspicuous, and Daniel has, with equal inevitability, been a testing ground and battlefield of that faith. If revelation is hidden in the Bible, then God is also hidden in the universe. If newer revelations of new aspects of truth or of new truths are possible, it is because a changing and partially unconscious God is incapable of a complete revelation. The infallible and inerrant Scripture is the only possible word from an omnipotent and sovereign God, and the doctrine of the infallible Word is the inevitable corollary of the doctrine of God the Omnipotent. The nature of Daniel forces this association upon us, and hence the importance of this book for its broader implications, as well as for its own immediate contents. The doctrine of God is offensive to man, since man, by his anthropocentricity, would reverse God's role and usurp his throne. In terms of this, man would become knowable and God unknowable. Man would stand forth revealed and God would become hidden. But Scripture asserts the contrary. A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. Man's goings are of the Lord. How can a man then understand his own way? Proverbs chapter 20, verse 24. If the sovereign decree is God's and not man's, then it follows that a man cannot understand his own way. First, the ultimate determination is not his, and he, at best, is only partially aware of his own nature. Second, lacking both the fullness of epistemological self-consciousness and historical maturation, he is not yet completely himself. Third, this means that not only is much of his life as yet unconscious, but, more than that, as yet unborn into the unconscious, because it is as yet future, even to that degree of appearance. Accordingly, such psychologies, psychiatrists, and theologies as follow the ancient siren song, Know thyself, seek a manifest impossibility. What measure of self-knowledge a man can have, he can have only in terms of the interpretation God places upon him as a creature, rebellious or redeemed. Since the primary causality of his life rests in God, no true interpretation or comprehension of his life is possible apart from God. God, on the other hand, being omniscient and omnipotent, is knowable, having no hidden nature and no subconscious strains. But he is not exhaustively knowable to man, for to know God exhaustively would require a mind equal to God's. But he can be and is known truly and consistently through his self-revelation. Our knowledge of God is analogical of divine knowledge. Although man's knowledge of God cannot, because of his creaturehood, be exhaustive or comprehensive, it is, by virtue of his creation in God's image, true knowledge, while exhaustive and comprehensive knowledge is found only in God. God is completely knowable to himself, because, as Van Til has stated it, God's being is coterminous with his self-consciousness. God's being and his self-knowledge are identical, whereas for man, no such identity of being and analytical knowing exists, nor can it exist, since all his knowledge is synthetic and depends on reference to something other than himself. The substitution, therefore, of psychology for theology and the psychology of religion for the philosophy of religion is an indication of the radical reversal of the roles of God and man. It involves a search for an impossible and non-existent wisdom in terms of an autonomy of man, which is mythological and irrational. The God of Daniel is the sovereign Lord who shatters man's illusions of autonomy and humbles his claims to knowledge. Dreams, therefore, have an important part in Daniel. Man is tormented by the ghost of the future and the unknown, and made mindful, against his wishes, of the temerity of his rebellion and the insanity of his claims. Second, Daniel is offensive because it sets forth predictive prophecy in its plainest form, unpoetic, blunt, and unmistakable. Written according to its claim in the 6th century BC by Daniel, it charts the course of empire for centuries ahead, sets forth the coming of Christ and the establishment of the Church, and does all this with this specific and singular confidence that this is not only a revelation from God, but also the manifestation of God's normal and continuing government of men and of nations. And this is a stumbling block. Men and nations want to believe in their autonomy, their independence of God. They prefer to see themselves as masters of their own destinies, as the movers and shapers, creators, not creatures. But against all this, Daniel affirms emphatically that God is the only independent agency in history, both the creator and governor of time and eternity. God, who determines all things, and in whom we live and move and have our being, determines our every today and tomorrow, and knows and determines history, because he knows and determines himself. Even as God has no unexplored potentialities in himself, no subconscious whatsoever, knowing himself and governing himself absolutely, so history, his creation, has no unexplored potentialities within it, and no unconscious elements that can develop apart from God's eternal decree. The nations are as nothing in his sight, and he moves men, nations, and empires to his ends, not theirs. He uses all history, is never used by it, bends it, molds it, shapes it in terms of his eternal purpose, and none can stay his hand. But men seek a God they can use, not a God who uses them. And hence the offensiveness of Daniel. So, very specific predictive prophecies make inescapable the subordination of time to the eternal decree. Third, Daniel is offensive because of its miracles. Miracles whose nature predicates certain things concerning God and history. Common to antiquity was the faith that the truth of a religion was apparent in the success it brought to man. This ancient pragmatism saw religion as instrumental to man. The truth of religion depended on its results. If the gods of Egypt gave success to Egypt, they were, to that extent, true. If Babylon gained precedence, then its gods acquired precedence also. Daniel chapter 1 verse 2 indicates that Nebuchadnezzar, in taking the temple vessels from Jerusalem to the house of his God, thereby expressed the preeminence of his faith and the necessary subservience of Judah's faith to his own. Basic to this practice is a man-centered orientation. God is to be judged in terms of his usability, what he can do for man, and the extent to which he prospers him, a faith as common in the church as in the world, unfortunately. This pragmatism and anthropocentricity rests again on the premise of man's autonomy. If man is for himself the final truth, and his existence the basic premise of his faith, then God and religion can have no independent character or truth, but can be only relational in meaning. They are not substantive, but adjectival, and hence, as with modernism, a changing faith is a necessity in terms of the changing conditions and needs of man. The rigidity of biblical faith becomes proof of a false rationalism and evidence of irreligion, and biblical faith becomes despised, scorned, and persecuted. The miracles of Daniel are an affront to man-centered and pragmatic religion, and rightly so, for these miracles are a declaration of war against all such faith and a reduction of it to absurdity, even as it lords itself over godly man. These miracles also transcend the faith of the Church and reveal the sovereignty of God in his salvation, his power towards the powerless, and his contempt of the mighty of this world. Then, fourth, Daniel is offensive because it assumes and asserts the total providence and government of God, that God governs, rules, and overrules in every event of history to the minutest detail. Men prefer the anarchy of chance, which permits them to be gods of their little corner of chaos, to the sovereignty of God and His total predestination of all things. A God who can place us weeping by the waters of Babylon, or young and alone, a prisoner under training in Nebuchadnezzar's palace, is a God who obviously governs and uses man and is never governed or used of him. This is not what man has sought in religion, to which he has turned for power, healing, good fortune, in short, for a general liability insurance policy. God, in return for certain kindnesses from man, should be thereby placed in debt to man and subjected to emergency call and notice. But Daniel and his friends, however exalted in the empire, are still the instruments of Nebuchadnezzar, or man, and behind and beyond that, of God. Such a God indeed constitutes a poor insurance to a man in search of his own exaltation, but he constitutes the only security and joy for a man who knows himself to be a creature. 4 such men, very young men, were chosen by Babylon from the newly conquered Judea and taken to the king's palace for a 3-year training course, studying languages, astronomy, astrology, mathematics, natural history, agriculture, architecture, and political science. The ancient dream of one world characterized Babel, Assyria, and Chaldea, when nations were broken, populations were shuffled to break down national ties, and young men of conquered countries were trained to high office to help hold the loyalties of their people and give a cosmopolitan and international character to the empire. The diversity of leadership and the shifting of populations would lead to a, quote, melting pot, end quote, society, whereby the unified world concept would take root. Accordingly, while in a sense prisoners, they lived in luxury, eating a portion of the king's meat. According to 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 22 and 23, Solomon's provisions for one day amounted to 30 measures of fine flour, a measure being equal to 75 gallons, 60 measures of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 oxen out of the pasture, 100 sheep, and much wild game, such as harts, roebucks, fallow deer, and fatted fowl. We can certainly assume that Nebuchadnezzar's provisions were likewise luxury abounding. Certainly, such luxury was calculated to weaken old loyalties already severed by time and distance, and to foster a new allegiance. In terms of all this opulence, Jehovah and Judah could become both remote and primitive. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Chapter 1, verse 8. Daniel was clearly the leader of these 4 unblemished youths, who were clearly therefore not themselves eunuchs, although others of royal blood were made eunuchs. Isaiah chapter 39, verse 7. Young men possibly in their early teens at the time of their deportation. No asceticism was involved in this request, but 2 clear-cut principles. First, eating was then a sacrament of communion with not only men, but also their gods. In such a difficult situation, the kind of accommodation permitted to Naaman in the house of Rimmon, 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 18 and 19, was hardly possible to 4 young men who, if they did not begin on principle, could not continue therein. The stand was made diplomatically, with every intention of furthering their service to Nebuchadnezzar by means of their higher loyalty to God. Second, if they could make no stand in simple matters, how could their faith stand the testing of heavy responsibilities later? Biblical holiness is never in terms of an abstract principle or in terms of withdrawal from this world, but in terms of meeting the problems and struggles of this life victoriously. Accordingly, their purpose was preparation in terms of very real necessities and struggles. No biblical saint ever sought holiness in and of himself, it was a product of his faith and an aspect of his strength. His purpose was not holiness per se, but the glory of God and his own enjoyment of life under God, thus never a flight from the world, but a preparation for problems and responsibilities in the world. The, quote, pulse, end quote, requested, chapter 1, verse 12, in place of the king's meat and wine, was vegetables and grain, things not normally offered in sacrifice or consecrated at the Babylonian altars prior to regular use. Until such time as they could be masters of their own table, they preferred the restricted diet, by no means normal to Hebrews, and were prospered by God therein. When the time of examination arrived, the king found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in his realm, in all matters of wisdom and of understanding. Chapter 1, verse 20, MG. Judah was broken, Jerusalem despoiled, and the most excellent youth made servants of Babylon's might. But that same word which requires faithfulness and obedience of servants, Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 to 25, makes clear also that, having been bought with a price by Christ, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 20, they can never become servants of men in the abject sense, but, in their obedience, must deliberately do it, as to the Lord, and not unto men. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Such service is possible only if the God served is he by whose decree kings reign, the sparrow falls, and masters exercise authority. In terms of his sovereign will, he shall be served, willingly or unwillingly, by every creature, so that men of faith can serve in Nebuchadnezzar in the confidence that the glory shall be God's. In this faith and in this confidence, these 4 young men of Judah moved. The issues are thus clearly brought into focus. Babylon, echoing the ancient dream of Babel of a one world, a paradise without God, a cosmic unity on a principle other than the Creator, had, in Nebuchadnezzar, a brilliant and proud agent of that faith, a man dedicated to that unity and order which statesmen have sought since Cain built the city of Enoch. Genesis chapter 4, verse 17. Thorkild Jacobson has described the early Mesopotamian concept. The fact that the Mesopotamian universe was conceived of as a state, that the gods who owned and ruled the various city-states were bound together in a higher unity, the assembly of the gods, which possessed executive organs for exerting outward pressure as well as for enforcing law and order internally, had far-reaching consequences for Mesopotamian history and for the ways in which historical events were viewed and interpreted. It vastly strengthened tendencies towards political unification of the country by sanctioning even the most violent means used toward that end. For any conqueror, if he was successful, was recognized as the agent of Enlil. It also provided, even at times when national unity was at a low ebb and in many city-states were, for all practical purposes, independent units, a background on which international law could work. This background gave a principle of continuity and of common ground to human relations, a substructure common to all men everywhere. As will appear, much more was involved in the concept of continuity, a principle of unity which made possible not only political and religious unity without disruption to the components, but also made all men constituents of a common divinity if they but successfully exercised themselves. Against all this, the faith of Daniel and his friends was an alien and disruptive force, a violent rupture of human society. Such a God as Daniel's Lord, Adonai, was too jealous a creator, too exclusive a covenant husband, and too alien and discontinuous with the universe of man to be other than an offensive intruder to Babylonian man. The issue was thus clearly visible. The concept of continuity meant growth and development in God as well as in man, whereas the God of Daniel is discontinuous with his creation and is beyond growth, being himself the omniscient and omnipotent creator of all things and of all growth. Because God is absolute in his being, his word and work inevitably share in that absolute self-consciousness which makes all hiddenness impossible. Thus, the infallibility of his word and the predestination of all things are necessary consequences of his being, nor can any one aspect of his being in revelation be limited without limitation being imposed on another. A hidden world means elements of hiddenness in God. A limited decree again reintroduces the hidden into God's being. Against all these sunderings, the Book of Daniel is a bulwark, and, to its critics, an unalterable offence.